In beginning with the Polar Lab, I was very interested in permafrost and what that did to the landscape. So I had two different things that I wanted to specifically investigate via the permafrost issue. One was looking at how stunted trees grow on this thin skin of available soil, and the other was to look at a phenomenon called a pingo, which is essentially just a slab of ice that's become trapped between two layers of permafrost. It's a bit like a skin condition in the landscape, and you get this small volcano that gradually gets larger and larger. Kind of figured out this route that I wanted to take, two routes really. One was to float the NOAA about 70 miles so that I would also have a sense of how the topography changed as it went down the north slope, the west slope in this case. And the other was to travel the pipeline, or the haul road, which runs this kind of wonderful cross-section south to north, about 500 miles, arriving finally at the Arctic coast. Well, I have now this one cast of a very old Arctic tree, which I'll use as a comparison to another casting I just cast about 100 feet of a very large hemlock in the Pacific Northwest, just outside Seattle. So there'll be this kind of juxtaposition between two trees that are the same age but wildly different in stature and scale. Part of what drew me to the idea of working with this Polar Lab experience is looking at how the Arctic is changing and how that can affect what I'm directly doing in the landscape. So working with a pingo, which is something that's about ice freezing and thawing and making this change in the landscape, was a very direct answer. But also this idea of finding this kind of northernmost tree that I could carve, and this idea that those trees are slowly migrating north further and further into this Arctic environment as it's thawing. What opened up this much greater breadth of things to sort of look at and investigate was the journey to each of those places. And it was traveling along this river for days and days just to reach this site of the tree and watching these banks slough off and looking at these layers of exposed permafrost and thinking about how thin and tenuous this layer of soil that supports this very stunted sort of growth, how that was just a much kind of wider thing to take in than this kind of narrow focus. And oftentimes when I set up an agenda to go out and do something like casting a tree or drawing and sketching these pingos, you find something along the way that's more compelling than what your initial inspiration was.